that? Oh, okay, let's dive in. We're really trying to get to the bottom of knowledge itself today, starting with, well, the biggest question maybe. Is there anything out there, any single fact, any observation, anything at all that's so absolutely certain that no reasonable person could possibly doubt it, even if they're trying their hardest to be skeptical?
That's exactly the goal. We're stepping back from just accepting everyday things and really trying to critically explore what certainty even means. In philosophy, well, that's what it does, right? It tackles those huge questions, but critically, not just casually. It forces us to see the vagueness, the confusion hiding behind ideas we usually just take for granted.
Right. Critically, not carelessly. That's key.
Yeah.
And we really want this to feel like a journey for you, the listener, not like we're just reading from a script.
Yeah.
So to kick things off, to start this whole systematic look, we need to start somewhere really basic, like the most ordinary thing you can think of, something we all assume we know inside out.
So let's start with a table. The one maybe in the room with you right now. Usually we just assume, yeah, I know this table.
Yeah.
It's there. It's rectangular, hard, maybe wooden brown, simple
enough.
But as soon as you start looking at it philosophically, really scrutinizing it, huge problems pop up immediately. It really challenges that easy confidence we have in our senses. Okay, so let's break that down. First big issue, color. You think, okay, this table has a real color, but the source material we're drawing on makes it clear the color you see is actually incredibly unstable. It's relative.
Yeah.
Totally. Like if you just shift your position slightly, maybe move a few feet, the way the light reflects changes, and suddenly the color looks different, or the patches of color shift.
And if there are 10 people looking at the same table,
no two are seeing the exact same pattern of color. It's slightly different for everyone depending on their precise viewpoint.
Okay, and then it gets even weirder if you change the lighting, right? Like bring in a lamp.
Exactly. Artificial light changes the color again. Or what if the person looking is colorblind? Their perception is different. And, in complete darkness, well, there's no color at all.
So the conclusion seems pretty drastic then. The color isn't in the table itself.
Right. It can't be an inherent property only of the table. It depends on the table, yeah, but also on you, the spectator, and critically on how the light is hitting it.
But hang on, why can't we just sort of pick one? Like, say the true color is the one you see in normal daylight, assuming you're not colorblind. Seems practical.
It seems practical, but philosophically, it's arbitrary. If we're being really rigorous, trying to define the table as it is in itself, independent of anyone looking, we have to admit that choosing one specific lighting condition or type of observer is just, well, favoring one viewpoint.
I see. So to get to the table's independent nature, we have to strip away the color we perceive.
We're forced to conclude the color isn't in the object in that simple way.
Wow. Okay, that's already making the familiar table feel a bit shaky. And it's the same problem with texture and shape, isn't it?
Absolutely. Texture, for example. You run your hand over it, feels smooth, but put it under a microscope.
It looks completely different, like a miniature landscape, right? Full of roughnesses and hills and valleys, as the text puts it. So the question becomes, which one is the real table's texture? The smooth feeling, the microscopic view. And if you trust the microscope, why stop there? What about an even more powerful microscope?
Yeah, where does it end? Our senses start to seem pretty unreliable, even contradictory.
Confidence just evaporates when you push it.
And shape. That's maybe even more abstract, because the shape we see is constantly changing too.
Right. If the table is, say, objectively rectangular, from almost any angle you look at it, it doesn't look rectangular. The angles look acute or obtuse. The parallel sides seem to converge in the distance. Like railway tracks.
So the rectangular shape we know it has,
right,
that's not what our eyes are actually taking in. No, it's an inference. Something we've learned to deduce based on how the appearance changes as we move. What we directly sense, the visual data, is constantly shifting. The appearance is immediate, but the reality behind it is something our mind constructs.
Okay, this is getting complicated fast. We definitely need some clear terms here if we're going to talk about this without mixing up the appearance and the thing behind it. Yeah, good point. We need 3 key terms. First, sense data. These are the things immediately known in sensation. That specific patch of brown you're seeing right now, the feeling of hardness, the sound it makes if you tap it, the raw input, right? The raw data before any interpretation.
Exactly. Then there's sensation. That's the experience of being immediately aware of those sense data. Sensation is the act of seeing. The sense data is the color patch being seen.
Okay, sense data is sensation is the experiencing, and the third...
That's the physical object or matter. This is the The hypothesized real thing, the actual table that we assume exists independently of us and somehow causes our sense data.
Let me try an example and make sure I've got it. And for anyone listening, if I touch, say, a cold piece of marble, the feeling itself, that coldness, that smoothness, that's the sense datum.
Yep.
The fact that my mind is registering that feeling, that's the sensation. And the actual slab of marble, the thing that's still there even if I walk away, that's the physical object. You've got it.
Yeah.
That distinction is crucial because the immediate problem is clear. We don't directly know the physical object, the real table. It has to be an inference. Based on the sense data, we do know directly, which leads us straight into the two massive philosophical questions we need to tackle. One, is there actually a real table, matter at all? Does it exist? And two, if it does exist, what is it actually like? Since all the properties our senses tell us about seem to be, well, relative. Okay, so we've thoroughly unsettled the world around us. We need some kind of solid ground to stand on now, a starting point we absolutely cannot doubt. And this is where René Descartes comes in, right? With his method of systematic doubt, exactly. Descartes was, well, relentless. His idea was, to find certainty, you have to doubt absolutely everything you possibly can. Your senses, maybe they're deceiving you. The world outside could be a dream. Even math. He imagined, famously, a powerful, deceitful demon feeding him illusions. He really pushed skepticism to its limit, doubting his own body, everything.
He did. And through that intense process, that kind of radical doubt, he found just one single thing he couldn't logically doubt.
His own existence. The famous cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am.
Right. If he's doubting, there must be an I doing the doubting. If he's having experiences, even if they're illusions, something must be having those experiences. Subjective awareness becomes the bedrock.
The one absolute certainty.
It is. But we need to be careful here, add a little refinement. Even Descartes, I think, might be slightly too broad for absolute rock-bottom certainty.
How so?
Well, it sort of implies a continuous self, doesn't it? Like the same I who was thinking yesterday will be thinking tomorrow. But proving that continuous permanent self, that's almost as tricky as proving the permanent table exists.
Ah, I see. So the certainty isn't really I, this ongoing person, am seeing brown. What's the absolute minimum we can be sure of? The certainty lies in the immediate experience itself. It's more like a brown color is being seen or a feeling of doubt is occurring. It only points to a momentary consciousness, a fleeting something or other that's having the experience right now. So the certainty attaches to the specific present thoughts and feelings, the immediate sense data.
Precisely those. Our particular thoughts, feelings, the sense data we are aware of right now, they have this kind of primitive, undeniable certainty.
And this is huge because it works even if you are dreaming, right? Or hallucinating.
Exactly. Even if it's all an illusion created by that Cartesian demon, the experience itself, the sensation you're having in that moment, is undeniably real as an experience. You're absolutely certain of what it's like of that moment.
Okay, so the existence of our own sense data, our immediate private experiences, that's the bedrock, immune to doubt. That's where we have to start building any knowledge from. We know what's in here. That's our solid ground. Now the question is, does this inner world of certain sense data actually point to anything out there?
Right.
We've got our certain starting point, private sense data. So back to that first big question from earlier, does all this private stuff actually point to an independent reality? Matter, common sense screams yes, obviously.
Of course it does. But philosophically, we have to seriously consider the alternative, the idealist position, which basically says, no, reality is fundamentally mental, not material.
Okay, but before we get deep into idealism, let's look at why denying matter seems, well, tricky. The source mentions thinking about the practical consequences. Like, back to the table.
Yeah. If the table was only my sense data, what happens when I can't sense it? Say, I cover it completely with a cloth?
Your sense data of the table stop. So if the table is only sense data, it just ceases to exist. Poof.
That's the implication. And the cloth, which you are still sensing, would just be hanging there in midair, resting on nothing.
That seems completely absurd. Physically impossible.
Physically impossible, yes. But crucially, not logically impossible. And the text warns us, if you want to be a philosopher, you have to get used to not being scared off by absurdity.
Okay, fair point. It's not a logical contradiction, but it makes the no matter view incredibly complicated, doesn't it? Like the universe is just constantly blinking in and out of existence depending on where I look.
It gets very complicated very quickly, which leads us to the main argument for matter, the sort of common sense hypothesis. It really hinges on the need for public neutral objects.
Meaning?
Well, my sense data are private to me, You see the table slightly differently, remember. Different angle, different light reflections.
Mm-hmm.
But if 10 of us are sitting around a dinner table, we all assume we're sharing the same table. For that to make sense, there needs to be something more than just our individual private sense data. There needs to be a single public neutral object out there that causes all our similar but slightly different sensations.
Okay, that makes intuitive sense. But wait, if we're starting from only my subjective certainty, my sense data, how can I bring other people into it? Aren't they just sense data to me, the sight of them, the sound of their voices?
That's a sharp point, yes. Initially, we can't appeal to the testimony of others. If I'm doubting the external world, I have no immediate grounds to believe other minds exist, except as maybe characters in my own dream. It looks circular.
So how do we get around that? We need something within my own experience that suggests an external world.
Exactly. And this is where the simplicity argument comes in. Or you could call it inference to the best explanation. The idea is, while logically possible that everything is just my own mind and my experiences, that solipsism, it's a vastly more complicated explanation than the common sense view.
Okay, so simplicity becomes a guide. The less convoluted explanation is probably better. And the classic example here is the cat, right?
The cat is perfect for illustrating this. If the cat is just my sense data, it literally cannot exist when I'm not looking at it.
So if I blink, the cat vanishes and then instantly pops back into existence, maybe in a different spot when I open my eyes.
That's the implication. It makes explaining the cat's behavior incredibly awkward. Like, how does the cat get hungry when it's not existing between meal times?
Right. Hunger isn't something I can sense directly in the cat. It's an internal state. If the cat is just patches of color and shapes that I see.
Those patches can't be hungry. So the behavior I see, the meowing, the rubbing against my legs, all the sense data that suggest hunger becomes totally random and inexplicable if it's just changes in appearances. Why would those patches change in that particular food-seeking way?
It makes no sense without assuming an underlying continuous cat with its own internal states.
Precisely. And this problem just explodes when you think about other people. Their actions, their words. We instinctively interpret them as signs of thoughts and feelings like our own. Life, science, everything depends on that assumption.
It's just vastly simpler to assume they really exist independently rather than being like incredibly complex puppets in my dream.
Immensely simpler.
Yeah.
So the belief in an external world, in matter, it's an instinctive belief. It's not logically proven from sense data alone, but it's the hypothesis that best simplifies and systematizes the flood of experiences we have. And because it works so well, leads to consistent predictions and a coherent picture, we don't really have a good reason to reject it. Okay, so we land on matter probably exists.
Yeah.
It's the simplest, most coherent explanation for our experience, even though we have to admit there's that tiny sliver of philosophical doubt, the what if it's all a dream possibility. That residual doubt remains. But we proceed based on this strong, simplifying hypothesis. So if matter exists, the next question is, what is it actually like? What's its intrinsic nature?
And this brings us back towards idealism, but maybe in a different way. Idealists had theories about the nature of reality, even if they sometimes denied matter existed independently. They thought reality was fundamentally mental.
Right. You have thinkers like Bishop Berkeley. He famously denied non-mental matter existed at all. For him, physical objects like our table were really just ideas in the mind of God.
Which is a clever way around the problem of permanence, isn't it? The table doesn't vanish when I stop looking because God is always looking, always perceiving it.
Exactly. It gives objects independence from us without making them some kind of unknowable, non-mental stuff.
Yeah.
Leibniz had a different but related idea. He thought what looks like matter is actually made up of collections of rudimentary minds, like a colony of souls.
But the core argument for many idealists, that anything we know must be mental, seems to have a flaw in it. Russell called it the idealist fallacy, based on confusing two different things.
Yes, it hinges on the ambiguity of the word idea or thought. Berkeley, for instance, seemed to confuse the act of apprehending the mental process of thinking about or seeing something with the object apprehended, the thing itself that you're thinking about or seeing.
Okay, let's make that concrete. If I'm thinking about the Eiffel Tower, the thinking is definitely mental, happening in my head.
Undeniably mental, yes.
But does that automatically mean the Eiffel Tower itself must also be mental just because my mind is interacting with it?
No, not at all. The act of knowing is mental, but the thing known doesn't have to be. If everything we apprehended had to be mental, it would weirdly limit our minds. It would mean our minds could only ever know their own contents, never anything truly other than themselves.
Right. Knowing things different from ourselves seems pretty fundamental.
Okay, so if we reject the idea that matter must be mental, what does science tell us about its nature, assuming it exists independently? Well, physical science gives us a pretty stark picture. It tends to reduce the properties of matter, primarily to motion and position. Think about light, heat, sound, and physics. They're often described as wave motions.
So scientists are mostly concerned with things they can measure mathematically. Mass, velocity, forces, spatial relationships. Exactly. They focus on the structure, the mathematical relations between things, and this leads to a striking consequence. The real gets stripped of the apparent, meaning the qualities we actually sense, the redness of an apple, the warmth of a fire, the sound of a bell, those aren't considered part of the real physical object by science.
Not in their raw qualitative form. The wave motion of light isn't the redness we see. The wave motion is considered the physical cause of our sensation of redness. Science effectively removes color, sound, smell, taste, even warmth and cold from the independent external world it describes.
So the world as described by physics is colorless, soundless, odorless.
Essentially, yes. Its properties are structural, relational, mathematical, position, motion, potential for causing effects. Any other intrinsic qualities it might have are basically irrelevant to the scientific description. It leaves the ultimate substance of matter quite mysterious.
And this even applies to space itself. The space science talks about isn't the space we see, right? Think about it. The space you see changes constantly. An object looks smaller when it's far away, right? But the physical object isn't actually shrinking, okay?
So physical space, the space science uses, has to be different. It's conceived as a neutral, public framework. It's inferred, not directly seen or felt. It's the framework needed to contain the physical objects and also our sense organs, our nerves, our brains, and the relations within this space determine how sensations arise.
So science can tell us the relative positions of things in this physical space, like Mars is further from the sun than Earth is.
Yes, it can map the relations, the structure. We know the arrangement because that structure needs to correspond in a systematic way to the relations we observe in our sense data. If one house looks nearer than another, the corresponding physical objects must have a similar spatial relationship.
But we can't know what physical space is like in itself, or what a straight line in physical space is intrinsically separate from how it looks visually.
Exactly. We know the relational structure, but the intrinsic nature of the points or lines or regions in that space remains unknown. We know it only by description, as the framework that holds the structure together.
Okay, this distinction between what we know directly and what we know indirectly by inference or description seems absolutely critical.
It is. And it leads us to formalize two fundamental ways we know things: knowledge by acquaintance and knowledge by description. Knowledge by acquaintance. That sounds like the direct, immediate awareness we talked about earlier. No inference involved. That's precisely it. It's direct awareness. Logically, you can be acquainted with something without knowing any facts or truths about it. It's just the raw encounter.
And the prime examples are our sense data, right? The immediate color patch, the feeling of hardness.
Those are the most obvious, yes. When you're directly conscious of, say, a specific shade of blue, there's no further, more direct knowledge of that specific shade possible. You're just acquainted with it.
And this acquaintance isn't just limited to the present moment?
No, it extends through memory. We have acquaintance with sense data we experienced in the past, though perhaps less vividly. And also through introspection, we're directly aware of our own current thoughts, feelings, desires. Self-consciousness gives us acquaintance with our mental states.
And crucially, you mentioned acquaintance with universals, general ideas.
Yes, things like whiteness, difference, similarity, or relations like being to the left of. These abstract concepts aren't sense data, but we grasp them directly through conception. We're acquainted with these general forms.
Okay, so basically everything we are absolutely foundationally certain about falls under acquaintance. The stuff that survives Descartes' doubt.
That's a good way to put it.
Which means pretty much the entire physical world, including the table, since we decided that's incurred, must fall into the other category.
It has to. That's knowledge by description. This is when you know that an object is the so-and-so. You know, it satisfies a certain unique description. This kind of knowledge is always built upon inference and involves knowing some truths.
So our knowledge of the real table is descriptive. We know it as, what was the phrase, the physical object which causes such and such sense data.
Exactly. We believe there is one unique object that fits that description, but we're never directly aware of the object itself. We only know it as the thing that meets the description.
This seems absolutely essential for things like history or knowing about people we've never met, like Bismarck, the example used. Perfect example. None of us were acquainted with Bismarck the man. We know him by description, the first chancellor of the German Empire. Our knowledge comes from testimony history books, accounts which ultimately trace back to sense data someone else was acquainted with, or descriptions built on descriptions. So, knowledge by description lets us reach far beyond our own tiny bubble of private experience. We can know about other places, other times, even other people's minds, potentially.
It's absolutely vital for expanding our world. Without it, we'd be trapped knowing only our immediate sensations and thoughts.
Okay, but this structure, everything ultimately boiling down to acquaintance, seems to imply a really important constraint on what we can even think or understand.
It does. It leads to what Russell calls the fundamental principle of composition, which states that any proposition, any statement we can actually understand, must be entirely composed of constituents with which we are acquainted.
Meaning, the words we use, the concepts in a statement, have to connect back somehow to things we've directly experienced or apprehended.
Yes, you have to attach some meaning derived from acquaintance to the components. When we talk about, say, Julius Caesar, none of us met him, but we understand the name Julius Caesar as a description, like the Roman general who crossed the Rubicon. And that description itself is made up of concepts: Roman general, crossed, Rubicon, which are either universals we're acquainted with or further descriptions that eventually bottom out in acquaintance.
Wow, okay, so the world of acquaintance is maybe small, but it's certain. The world we know by description is vast, potentially infinite, but it's all built on inference and rests on that small foundation.
That's a great summary of the distinction.
Now, if we want to build knowledge beyond just describing individual things, if we want to find general truths, like in science, we need to bridge the gap between past experience and future expectation. And that brings us right up against the huge, thorny problem of induction.
Ah, yes, the problem of induction. It's fundamental. We all instinctively believe the future will, resemble the past.
It feels like pure habit, right? The sun came up yesterday and the day before and every day I remember, so I fully expect it to rise tomorrow. But the question is, does the fact it has happened loads of times actually give me logical evidence it will happen next time?
Logically. It's incredibly difficult to justify. Experience definitely causes us to form expectations. But that psychological fact doesn't make the expectation rational or justified.
This is the chicken example, isn't it? The famous story about the chicken and the farmer.
Exactly.
The chicken gets fed by the farmer every single morning for, say, a year. It has overwhelming empirical evidence based on past experience for the law. Farmer appears, food arrives, it trusts implicitly in the uniformity of nature. A trust that proves, fatally misplaced one morning.
Right. The farmer shows up, but this time, instead of bringing food, he wrings the chicken's neck.
Yeah.
The law failed, despite all the past confirmations.
So, the point is, the expectation, no matter how strong, was just a kind of blind habit based on the past. It wasn't truly reasoned knowledge about the future.
Precisely. It stems from an instinctive belief in uniformity that we can't actually prove will hold. The inductive principle is an attempt to capture this belief formally. It basically says the more often A has been associated with B in the past, the higher the probability they'll be associated next time. And if you get enough cases, it approaches certainty.
Probability, okay. Not absolute certainty. That seems important.
Crucial, because exceptions are always possible, as the poor chicken learned.
But even this principle itself,
Yeah.
you can't prove it's true using experience, can you?
No, you absolutely cannot. That's the core paradox. Any attempt to argue from experience that induction works, induction worked yesterday, so it'll work tomorrow,
Right.
is already using induction to make the argument.
It's completely circular.
Viciously so. So we're left in a difficult spot. We either have to accept the inductive principle based on what the source calls its intrinsic evidence, maybe because it just seems self-evident, or because it's necessary for science and rational life. It simplifies everything. Or we have to give up any claim to rationally expect anything about the future.
So we basically accept it as a necessary leap of faith for practical life.
That's arguably what we do. We accept it as a fundamental assumption.
Okay, this reliance on unproven principles like induction seems to push us towards a different kind of knowledge entirely, knowledge that doesn't seem to depend on experience or probability, a priori knowledge.
Yes, a priori knowledge. Knowledge we can seemingly arrive at just by thinking without needing to go out and check the world. Logic and pure mathematics are the classic examples.
Historically, this was a big debate, right? Rationalists versus empiricists.
Huge debate. You had rationalists like Descartes and Leibniz arguing for innate principles known by reason alone, and empiricists like Locke and Hume arguing that all knowledge ultimately comes from sense experience.
And the synthesis presented here is?
It's kind of a blend. It agrees with the rationalists that yes, a priori principles do exist. We know things like the laws of logic or mathematical truths without needing experiments. That's a big concession to rationalism.
Yeah, there's a catch?
The catch, leaning towards empiricism, is that these a priori principles cannot tell us about what exists. They only tell us about relationships between concepts or possibilities. Any knowledge that something actually exists in the world still has to come from experience, from sense data.
So a priori knowledge gives us hypothetical necessities. If this, then that. Like, if something is true, whatever follows logically from it must also be true.
Exactly.
Or the basic laws of thought. Identity, A is A. Non-contradiction, something can't be both A and not A. Excluded middle, something must be either A or not A. And of course, 2 + 2 = 4. These seem certain just by understanding the terms. And this is where Kant comes in again with a really important insight about math specifically. He called it synthetic a priori.
Yes, that's a crucial, if sometimes daunting, concept.
Let's try to unpack it simply. Why does it matter that math might be synthetic? What does synthetic even mean here?
Okay, so an analytic statement is basically true by definition. The predicate has already contained the subject concept, like all bachelors are unmarried. Unmarried is part of the definition of bachelor. Doesn't really add new information.
Just unpacks the definition.
Right. Synthetic, on the other hand, is where the predicate adds new information not already contained in the subject. Kant's big insight was that mathematical truths, like $7 + 5 = 12 too, are actually synthetic.
How so? Isn't 12 just what you get when you combine 7 and 5?
Well, Kant argued that the concept 12 isn't actually contained within the concept 7 and 5 and plus. You have to perform a mental operation, a synthesis, to arrive at 12. It's a necessary truth. You know it a priori, without checking apples, but it genuinely extends your knowledge. It's not just a definition.
All right. So mathematical truths aren't just elaborate tautologies. They're constructing near necessary knowledge, but somehow doing it without relying on observing the world.
That's the power and the puzzle of it. It's certain, universal, necessary knowledge that isn't just definitional shuffling, and yet isn't derived from experience like the chicken's failed law.
So how can we know these universal, necessary truths a priori? What are they actually about? This seems to lead us into thinking about, well, abstract things.
Precisely. To solve this mystery, we need to talk about the world of universals. This draws heavily on Plato's ideas about forms. The universals are the general concepts, the shared natures that many different particular things can participate in.
Like whiteness, justice, triangularity, the general idea, not any specific white thing or just act.
Exactly. They're what most common words, adjectives, white, nouns, humanity, verbs, prepositions refer to. Particulars, on the other hand, are the specific individual things in the world that exist in space and time, denoted by proper names, Socrates, or indexicals now.
And the key difference that universals aren't, like physical, they don't change.
Right. Universals are considered immutable, timeless. They don't exist in the way physical objects do. Whiteness itself doesn't get dirty or fade. It's eternally itself. And a crucial point the text makes is about relational universals. Things like north of, before, greater than, loves.
Why are relations singled out as important? Seems philosophers often overlook them.
Apparently so. And neglecting relations leads to really weird philosophical dead ends. If you deny that relations are real, independent universals, you logically get pushed towards extreme views. Either everything is really just one single substance, monism like Spinoza, where all differences are illusory, or you have a universe of completely isolated substances that can't truly interact, monadism like Leibniz.
Because interaction requires relations. Okay, so a proper account needs these relational universals too.
Definitely. Relations like similarity or difference or spatial temporal relations are fundamental universals.
So if these universals aren't physical objects existing in time, and they're not just ideas in my head, because whiteness seems like it would still be a concept even if no one was thinking about it, what kind of being do they have?
This is where a distinction is made. Universals don't exist in the way particulars do, being somewhere, some when, changing. Instead, they subsist. They have being. They belong to a timeless, unchanging world of being, separate from the fluctuating world of existence.
Okay, let's try that with brown again. My particular brown table exists right now here. It's getting older, maybe scratched, so that's existence.
Yep.
But the universal concept, brownness, it doesn't exist anywhere specifically. It doesn't change or decay. It just is. That's subsistence.
That's the idea. Exactly. It's a different mode of reality, timeless, rigid.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And this distinction, subsistence versus existence, this solves the puzzle of a priori knowledge. It provides the key. The claim is, all a priori knowledge deals exclusively with the relations between universals. Aha. So when we know 2 and 2 are 4, we're not making a claim about all the actual pairs of things existing in the universe.
No. You're grasping a necessary, timeless relationship between the universal 2 and the universal 4 and the universal relation of addition. Since these universals subsist outside of time and space, the relationship between them is also timeless and necessary and can be known without checking empirical facts.
So the mystery of knowing something universal without checking every instance disappears. The knowledge is about the abstract structure itself.
Precisely. It's knowledge of the world of being, not the world of existence. Of course, to apply that knowledge, say, to count actual objects, you still need empirical knowledge that those objects exist. You need to know empirically that you have 2 apples and 2 oranges before applying the a priori $2 plus 2444 to know you have 4 pieces of fruit.
Okay, that makes sense. We've mapped out different kinds of knowing acquaintance, description, a priori knowledge of universals, but we haven't nailed down what truth itself actually is. Since knowledge involves true belief, and belief can be wrong, we need a solid definition of truth.
Right. And first, we need to clear away a tempting but ultimately flawed idea, the coherence theory of truth. This is the idea that a belief is true if it just fits in nicely with all your other beliefs, creates a harmonious, consistent system.
Yeah, it sounds plausible, especially thinking about how science builds consistent theories. But as a definition of truth itself, it fails, for a couple of reasons.
Okay, what are they?
First, you could potentially have multiple, perfectly coherent systems of belief that are mutually exclusive. Like the source suggests, the belief that life is just one long, incredibly detailed and consistent dream could be made perfectly coherent internally.
But it wouldn't necessarily be true in the sense of matching reality.
Okay.
And the second reason, the second, maybe deeper reason, is that the very process of checking for coherence relies on believing in the laws of logic, like the law of non-contradiction. A belief and its opposite can't both fit. But those logical laws themselves, their truth doesn't seem to come from cohering with anything else. They seem to be self-evident, foundational.
So coherence can't be the ultimate foundation if it relies on non-coherent logical truths to work.
Exactly. Which pushes us towards the alternative, the correspondence theory. The common sense idea, really. Truth is correspondence with fact. A belief is true if it matches up with the way things actually are. Okay, that sounds straightforward. But making it precise, especially to handle false beliefs, gets a bit technical, doesn't it? It does. The key move is to stop thinking of belief as a simple two-way relation between a mind and a single thing believed.
Why? What's the problem with that? If I believe the cat is on the mat, isn't that just me related to the fact the cat is on the mat? That works fine if the belief is true. But what if it's false? Let's use the Othello example. Othello falsely believes Desdemona loves Cassio. If belief was a relation to the single object Desdemona's love for Cassio, well, that object simply doesn't exist if the belief is false. So how could Othello be related to a non-existent thing? Falsehood becomes impossible. Okay. So if the thing believed doesn't exist when the belief is false, the belief relation itself breaks down. So what's the fix? The fix is to see belief as a more complex relation involving the mind and multiple other terms. When Othello believes Desdemona loves Cassio, the believing relation links Othello, the subject, to 3 object terms. Desdemona, the relation loves, and Cassio. So the belief itself involves multiple components, and it's true only if.
It's true if and only if there exists a corresponding complex fact in the world made up of just those object terms. Desdemona loves Cassio, arranged in that specific order by the object relation. This fact exists independently of Othello's mind.
So Othello's belief is true if the fact Desdemona's love for Cassio actually exists out there. If that fact doesn't exist, the belief is false. But the belief itself, the mental relation involving Othello, Desdemona loves Cassio, still exists as a psychological state.
Precisely. This model allows beliefs to exist whether they are true or false, defining truth as correspondence to an independent fact.
Okay, that's a robust definition. Now, using that, how much of what we typically call knowledge actually qualifies as genuine knowledge in the strictest sense, meaning a true belief that's either intuitively certain or logically derived from certainties?
Well, by that very high standard,
Yeah.
probably very little. Most of what we confidently call knowledge in everyday life is actually, philosophically speaking, probable opinion. Meaning it's a very firm belief, maybe even one we'd bet our lives on, but it lacks that absolute, infallible self-evidence that characterizes direct acquaintance or the simplest logical truths. There's still, theoretically, room for doubt.
So certainty isn't just on-off, it's a scale.
Exactly.
There's a whole spectrum. At the top, you have absolute certainty. Your immediate sense data, I'm seeing blue right now, the laws of logic, that guarantees truth. Down at the bottom, you have just a vague guess or inclination. Most of our beliefs about the world, science, history, even the existence of the table, fall somewhere in between high probability but not absolute certainty. And coherence, which we rejected as the definition of truth. Does it play a role here with probable opinion?
Yes, absolutely. Coherence becomes an incredibly important criterion or test for increasing the probability of our opinions. If a new belief fits well, makes systematic sense with the vast network of beliefs we already hold, its probability goes way up.
So that's how we justify choosing one explanation over another in science. Or how we usually distinguish waking life from a dream waking life forms a much more vast, coherent, predictable system.
Precisely. Coherence doesn't define truth, but it's a major guide to finding beliefs that are likely to be true, especially when dealing with complex inferences about the world.
Okay, so given all these distinctions, certainty versus probability, acquaintance versus description, the limits of induction, the nature of universals, where does this leave the grand ambition of philosophy, especially metaphysics? Trying to build these huge systems that explain the ultimate nature of reality.
Well, the sort suggests that many of those grand, ambitious attempts, like Hegel trying to prove the entire universe is one rational, good entity, often stumble. They tend to rely on shaky assumptions, maybe misusing logic or assuming things must be related in ways they aren't necessarily.
So philosophy isn't really about providing definitive final answers about the universe.
Perhaps its most valuable and achievable function is actually criticism. Critically examining our instinctive beliefs, the assumptions underlying science, questioning what we mean by knowledge, truth, reality, it clears away confusion.
And this act of criticism, of questioning, it has value in itself, even if it doesn't end with a neat answer.
Absolutely. The text argues it frees our minds from the tyranny of custom, the ingrained prejudices we pick up from common sense and habit. It opens our minds by showing us possibilities we hadn't considered, even seemingly absurd ones, like that cloth hanging in midair. It expands our intellectual horizons.
So it's about enlarging our understanding of what could be the case.
Yes, and in doing so, it leads to what the source calls an enlargement of the self. By engaging in philosophic contemplation, by trying to view the universe impartially, focusing on the not-self, on reality as it might be, independent of our own biases and desires, we grow.
How does focusing on the not-self enlarge the self? That sounds a bit paradoxical.
It means stepping outside our narrow personal viewpoint. When we contemplate the vastness, the strangeness, the complexity of the universe, our own concerns and perspectives seem less all-important. We stop trying to force reality to conform to our wishes. This impartiality, this willingness to see things as they are, is what allows the mind itself to become greater, more objective.
So by contemplating the greatness of the universe, our minds kind of reflect that greatness. We achieve a sort of citizenship of the universe, free from petty personal worries.
That's the ultimate value proposed. It liberates us. It takes us from the tiny point of certainty, our own immediate thoughts, and shows us the immensity of what we don't know for certain. The complex web of inference holding up even our belief in something as simple as a table.
Which brings us right back to where we started, but hopefully with a much deeper appreciation for the complexity. And it leaves us, and you listening, with a final thought to chew on. We spent all this time realizing that even knowing a simple everyday table involves a huge amount of inference, based largely on an instinctive belief in an independent world because it simplifies things. If our knowledge of something so basic rests on that kind of assumption, what other big, powerful, instinctive beliefs maybe about life, about values, about society, about reality itself are you holding on to right now, perhaps without realizing they are assumptions? And shouldn't those beliefs also be subjected to the same kind of critical philosophical scrutiny we just applied to the table? That's definitely something worth thinking about long after this deep dive is over.